Hello, my name is Lucy. Welcome back to my channel. The video that you're about to watch is a character essay on Chuck Clayton and Nancy Woods, analyzing how their characters should have been portrayed in Riverdale. But what you might not know is, this video was filmed 3 years ago, back in 2022, when Riverdale was still on. I just thought I'd give this disclaimer because while I had stopped watching Riverdale at that point, there might be some things I say in this video that won't make much sense in the context of now, because when I filmed it, the show was still on. Thank you so much for understanding, and I hope that you enjoy it. There we go. That's my laundry. Hello everyone, my name is Lucy. Welcome back to my channel, and this character essay is part of a series of character essays on the Archie Comics characters and how them and their relationships with others should be portrayed in Riverdale that would help dimensionalize them better while staying truer to the comics. That said, these next several videos that I'm going to do of this series are not going to be nearly as long or in depth as my previous essays that you may have seen. Reason being is that we are now getting into the veteran characters of the comics that were either totally ignored or forgotten about and thrown away in the show. We are going to start this series off by Chuck Clayton and, by extension, his girlfriend, Nancy Woods. Charles Chuck Clayton is a character published by Archie Comics who lives in Riverdale and is the friend of Archie Andrews, Betty Cooper, Jughead Jones, Reggie Mantle, and other students at Riverdale High School. Chuck first appeared in Life with Archie number 110 in 1971. Chuck was created as a means of adding diversity to the Archie Comics characters, although Valerie of Josie and the Pussycats predates him by several years. Chuck is African American and the son of Floyd Clayton, who works at Riverdale High School as one of the school's coaches, and Alice Clayton, a housewife. In earlier stories, including his recurring appearances in Archie at Riverdale High, Chuck was usually shown as one of Riverdale High's top athletes. Chuck was also depicted as a close friend of Archie, often spending time together or engaging in various adventures. By the early 1990s, Chuck's interest and passion for cartooning was added to round out his character, as well as promote the comics that he appears in. In modern stories, Chuck is depicted primarily as a cartoonist whose greatest ambition is to someday become a professional comic book and comic strip illustrator. Despite the long hours he spends practicing his craft, he attempts to be a well-rounded individual by engaging in other pursuits, such as participating in sports, studying his bloodlines, and spending time with his girlfriend, Nancy Woods. A true artist at heart, his skills have often come in handy on many adventures with the Archie gang. Nancy is often the inspiration for his drawings, even though she believes Chuck should concentrate on her more at times. Many of their arguments stem from the inability of Chuck to step away from his art. Everyone who has seen Chuck's work realizes that he is a legend in the making. While Chuck is a minor character in most stories, one story showed him as a major character where he competed against Veronica on a game show which was a clear takeoff of win, lose, or draw. Chuck recruits 2 men from the local comic book store to be on his team, while Veronica, being Veronica, hires 2 professional artists to be on her team. Veronica loses the contest when her drawings are not deduced while Chuck's are deciphered. It's then revealed that Veronica hired abstract artists, which is quite funny. Chuck spends his winnings at the store owned by his 2 teammates, buying as many comic books in order to further research professional illustrators as well as support his teammates. Nancy Woods was introduced in the Pep Comic series in 1976, and for about 20 years appeared pretty inconsistently. However, she started appearing in the Archie Comics more frequently since the late 1990s. Unlike the other girls in Archie Comics, she has worn her hair in several different styles. In earlier appearances, her hair was more often up. In the 2000s, she often wore glasses. Her last name was Harris when she was first introduced, and has occasionally been Baker or Jackson, but is now officially Woods. That's like a lot of characters, I feel like, though. A lot of their names were not really decided until they were already like a full-fledged character. Because Cheryl's name was Blaze in one of the like one of the weird spin-off series. And why do I also feel like Ginger had a different name too? I don't know. Anyway, Nancy loves fashion, shopping, and having girls' nights with her friends Betty Cooper, Veronica Lodge, and Midge Klump. She goes to Riverdale High, where she is a cheerleader and plays tennis and softball. She also works on the school newspaper, The Blue and Gold, as both a reporter and editor. She is known to be a talented artist, but unlike Chuck, watercolor is her medium. I think we should start out with Nancy, because Nancy is only in the show in one episode, I believe. I believe in the Return of the Pussycats episode, Melody's very supportive girlfriend's name was Nancy Woods. But that's the only time that Nancy was ever in the show. And in that episode, I got the impression that Melody had met Nancy, like, well after they had graduated high school. So Nancy probably didn't even go to Riverdale High in the show. Now, this is coming from someone who grew up reading the comics, but I always liked Nancy, and I always liked her relationship with Chuck. It is probably the most stable relationship in the comics, unsurprisingly, because everybody else is like in a love triangle or not interested in anyone, Jughead. Again, characters like Nancy or Ginger or Midge weren't really, you know, nearly as in the forefront as Betty or Veronica, but I mean, they definitely were a bigger deal than Cheryl most of the time. And at least in the dynamic of all the girls in the Archie comics, I feel like characters like Nancy, Midge, and Ginger are needed to balance out, or at the very least react, to the unstable shenanigans of Betty and Veronica. And out of those three more background characters, I did often get the feeling that Nancy was the most stable out of all of them. Midge and Ginger do both serve similar purposes, but Midge uses Moose's jealousy a lot of the time to fuel the tension in their relationship and flirts with a bunch of other guys, notably Reggie, in order to wind Moose up. While Ginger, who is sometimes very stable and level-headed too, other times is known to have a very closely knit friendship with Cheryl, who we all know is... Now, it's hard to compare what I would want for Nancy instead for the hypothetical version of Riverdale that I'm envisioning for all of these videos. Because again, she really doesn't have a presence at all in the show. She's one of the veteran comic characters that they literally decided to scrap and throw away when they were starting to make the show. But someone that they didn't decide to forget about and throw away, at least not initially, is Chuck. So, let's talk about him. I already touched a bit on this in my horrible things about Riverdale that not enough people talk about video, but Chuck Clayton in Riverdale. Now, if you've seen any of these other video essays before, you will know that I talk about how they took all of these characters and turned them on their head. I've heard from many people that they believe that Jughead is the character that is the most warped by the creators of Riverdale, and I think I agree. Out of the main cast, he is the character that they changed the most, and they changed for the worst. But out of everybody, I think Chuck is the most warped. When I say that they turned his character on its head, I like literally mean it. There is not one thing that's the same about him from the comics to the show. Nothing. Literally nothing. The only thing is that they're both good at sports, which, like, that's the only thing that's really the same about anybody. They really antagonized him right off the bat. And just the way that Riverdale has treated its black characters over the years is... It's a blood-boiling thing to think about, but that's another video that I actually already did in my horrible things about Riverdale video. I had a whole section on that. But anyway, let's take a look at how his character was initially introduced at the beginning of season 1, when Veronica was going on the date with him. Now, I believe she says, "I'm going on a date with Chuck Clayton," and everybody is a little shocked, expressing concern and saying that Chuck is kind of a womanizer. Now, right off the bat, this is already a very stark contrast to Comic Chuck, as Comic Chuck is in literally the most stable relationship that exists in those comics. Once Nancy is introduced, Chuck is not interested in anyone besides Nancy, and vice versa. And to make matters worse, the show thought it was a good idea to have Chuck not only dating a bunch of women, but also taking advantage of them sexually and lying about what they consented to do. I don't remember exactly how they did this because I have no interest in going back to watching Riverdale from the beginning, but I believe they had this like score sheet or something that they were like given points based on like how valuable their date was. I don't remember, but whatever it was bad. Now I remember initially watching the show and not only being a little disturbed by how they totally changed Chuck's character and turned it on his head, but also obviously wasn't a big fan of that they chose the black guy as the guy who was the antagonist and the one who took advantage of a bunch of women. At the time, I did let that aspect slide a little bit more because, again, at the beginning of the series, they had a little more decent black representation, at least better than in recent years, and Jason and a bunch of other people were doing it too. But that still doesn't erase the fact that they totally changed Chuck's character from what it was in the comics. And they not only changed it, but they made him a much, much worse person. They changed every aspect of the character for the worst. Has a steady girlfriend? Make him a player. Is an incredibly talented, aspiring cartoonist as well as an awesome athlete? Make him just be interested in sports and dating girls, and make a really cheap shot at trying to redeem him by putting him in the terrible musical episode. Is so sweet and nice to literally everyone. Make him a villain who takes advantage of a bunch of girls and blames other people for his own actions. Like, are you kidding me? Even though his stage presence was really great in that musical episode. He was like the best part. Besides Archie's dancing. The thing about Chuck is that much like Reggie in that first season of Riverdale, they did kind of switch his character out for Cheryl as well. Chuck and Reggie are supposed to be in the Archie and Friends gang, friends with Archie, Betty, Veronica, Jughead, and everybody else, and Cheryl is not supposed to be friends with him. She's supposed to be the antagonist. That's how it always has been in the comics. If someone is to make an Archie Comics inspired show, I would hope that Chuck and Nancy would at least get a fair shot at being in the show and being actual characters in the show that mirror their comic counterparts. Because Lord knows that Riverdale didn't even come close to it. This section is probably going to be especially different because instead of talking about what I would want to see their friendships become in the show instead, because again, I really don't have anything to base it off of, I'm just going to talk about my favorite friendships in the comics that Chuck and Nancy both have. And I think from that, it'll be easy for all of us to imagine what it could have been like in the show. But now with Chuck and Nancy being in a steady relationship with each other, Chuck has a lot of friendships with boys and Nancy has a lot of friendships with girls. Even though I do remember one comic where Chuck and Betty were like looking for this famous author that Betty was a huge fan of and Chuck was helping her out. That was super cute, I gotta say. I like that friendship. But Chuck, being the exceptional athlete that he is of course good friends with Riverdale High's other top athletes, Reggie Mantle and Moose Mason. I've always liked to think that those three have a pretty tightly knit friendship, as they are often all better athletes than Archie. And Archie is a lot of the times too busy thinking about Betty and Veronica. Nevertheless, Chuck is also good friends with Archie. They have been known to go on adventures together in the comics. And while Archie's intentions are always the very purest that they can be, so are Chuck's. Except Chuck actually acts on his intentions a little more effortlessly than Archie does. Nancy is a very good and loyal friend to all of the girls in the Archie Comics gang, like Betty, Veronica, Ginger, and Midge. The latter, Midge, is who I always thought was Nancy's best friend. They always spend time together in the comics. I remember this one particular comic where Midge and Nancy and Betty and Veronica are all hanging out at all of these like winter sporting places, like at like a ski resort and at like a snowmobiling place and at an ice rink, and Betty is really good at all the winter sports, and Veronica is really bad at all the winter sports and is always falling down, and Midge and Nancy are just kind of observing this whole thing and seeing which technique gets more attention from boys. I say technique like Betty and Veronica are both purposely doing what they're doing to get attention from boys, but that wasn't the case. Betty was just really good at all the sports and Veronica was really bad, and they were both kind of gaining male attention from their performances at all of these winter sports. But what I thought was funny was that Midge and Nancy were kind of there and observing, and again were really the straight men or straight women to Betty and Veronica's antics. And that isn't the only story where this has happened either. I imagine that Midge and Nancy gravitate towards each other because, again, they are a lot more stable than Betty and Veronica, and I would imagine that they think Betty and Veronica's love triangle with Archie is quite ridiculous, as both of them already each have a consistent love interest throughout the comics. So in my hypothetical version of the show, I would love to see a great, stable, supportive friendship between Midge and Nancy. This love interest section is going to be far simpler than any other love interest section that I have ever done in the past, as I believe that Chuck and Nancy's only love interest should be each other. First, I just want to give you a quick rundown of their history in the comics. Nancy and Chuck are one of the series' few steady couples. While Nancy shares some of Chuck's interests in art, she often berates him for sometimes focusing more on his art than their relationship. Unlike many of their friends, Nancy and Chuck appear to date exclusively with each other. In her early appearances, this was due to the Archie comics considering interracial dating controversial. In later stories, their exclusive relationship has been mainly attributed to their preference to be devoted to each other. At times, this has led to conflict. In one story, Chuck's dad installs a curfew for the basketball team due to poor play, and everybody follows it and is improving except for Chuck, who is sneaking out to see Nancy. Now, like I said, a frequently used story element is that Chuck pays so much attention to his cartooning or sports, as in earlier stories, that he forgets about Nancy or fails to notice her, thus angering her. But like I said earlier, despite this fact, Nancy also has an interest and talent in art herself. And I think a cool thing about Nancy and Chuck is that they are two of the least problematic characters in the comics, at least as far as how they treat people and how they treat each other. I know that Moose and Midge also have a relatively stable courtship throughout the comics, but Moose is an incredibly jealous person, and Midge uses that to make their relationship or keep their relationship exciting by like flirting with other guys. But Nancy and Chuck really don't have any of that. Every time one of them has another love interest, it's in a comic that is not canon. In the Afterlife with Archie series, which is not canon, Nancy dates Chuck, but then is revealed to have a romantic relationship in secret with her friend Ginger Lopez. Another example of a non-canon instance with Nancy is in the 4th issue of Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, when she's a cheerleader who Betty and Veronica tried to recruit for their witch coven. Now, if Nancy and Chuck were to be in the show, I would want them to only be with each other. Obviously not for the same reason that the Archie comics initially wanted them to be together, because of the interracial dating controversy. With all of the other racial diversity that my version of Riverdale would be able to possess and maintain, there would be plenty of room for other interracial couples. But just basing Chuck and Nancy's relationship on their relationship in the comics, it is very sweet that they are the most stable relationship in the comics. And also, how cool would it be if they started out the series together, stayed together, and ended the series together? How often does that actually happen? Like, never? Especially in teen shows. In the show, I would obviously want Nancy to not be as, I guess, naggy or needy or reliant on Chuck, because like it's already established in the comics, she has a passion and talent for art too, and I think that that would be really cool for the two of them to pursue together and for it to be something to contribute to their relationship and not hinder it. I also think it would be cool for Nancy to be the head reporter and editor of the Blue and Gold instead of Betty and Kevin, which has always been cringy. And maybe this sounds cliche, but I also think that it would be cute to have that classic football player and cheerleader relationship that is ever so present in so many teen movies and shows before this one. And I think that's it, you guys. Thank you ever so much for watching. If you like this video, please don't forget to like it and subscribe to my channel for more fun videos from me, and stay tuned for more video essays on the veteran characters from the comics that were totally butchered in the show. Looking forward to it. Thank you so much for watching again, and I hope that you have a wonderful, amazing day.